The human child called to me. The human child was dying, and nothing I could do within the rules of the game would change that fact. The human child, one of those who called themselves Animorphs, asked me to explain. In that final moment, the human wanted to know, was it all worth it? The pain, the despair, the fear, the horror of violence suffered, and the corrupting horror of violence inflicted, was it all worth it? I said I could not answer that. I said that the battle was not yet done. Who are you? The child raged. Who are you to play games with us? You appear, you disappear, you play with us, you use us. Who are you? What are you? I deserve an answer. Yes, I said. Yes, you do. To this question, I will give you all the answer I know. Yo, check it! Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and while you lay there dying with some insistence, I'll tell you how I shed this mortal existence. Equatorial High Crystal, born and raised on the Untitled is where I spent most of my days. Gaming and slacking, lacking an ambition till I got drafted into a space expedition. When the captain showed up, we were all paralyzed. Watched as they rained mass genocide. I got in one little fight and they made me captain. We set out to find a new home standing. We ran into father who killed all my friends, but I took him in a music game and beat him in the end. My mind became collective. I was totally jacked. I was with it. Then I met the Krayak. I chased him around the Milky Way, then I sailed to the big eye. Yo, Holmes, let's play! I fell into a black hole and absorbed the infinite, and I took my place among the omnipotent. This review is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon, the clown prince of the free market. Well, we're gradually approaching the end of Animorphs, and along the way, we've reached the end of its sister series, the Chronicles books. Unlike the Megamorph books, which are just double-sized, easily ignorable adventure stories, each Chronicles book has had massive, earth-shaking implications that affect the way you see the rest of the series. That is, except this one. Apparently, I have given people the impression that I hate the Ellimist Chronicles, and this is simply not true. It would be more accurate to say that I am disappointed with it. Disappointed in how unlike a Chronicles book it is, and disappointed in how little it actually adds to the series. If we were to take it as a standalone novel, this book would be a flawed but fun enough rags to riches tale about a scrappy alien loser who gradually rose to godhood through ingenuity and self-improvement. That you can easily take it as a standalone novel should tell you how important it is to the greater Animorphs mythos, which is not at all. How many of you were actually asking for an Ellimist origin story? Okay, I guess some readers, but truth be told, I wasn't. I'm perfectly fine keeping an unexplainable mystical force unexplained and mystic, thank you very much. My mind goes to the Q from Star Trek, how they started off as these mysterious, godlike entities who judged over the entire universe, but due to overexposure and some poorly thought out attempts to explain their motives through metaphor, they turned into these petty godchildren with weird sexual hang-ups. And that's more or less the result of this book. The Ellimist is a petty child with weird sexual hang-ups. It's a bit more dignified here, but I wouldn't call the end results awe-inspiring. But let's put that aside right now and say it's a satisfactory origin story for your in-universe deity. To properly explain why I find the Ellimist Chronicles disappointing as a Chronicles book, we're going to have to spend a hefty amount of time exploring what a Chronicles book even is. It's not enough to say that they're prequels. The first three Chronicles books follow certain trends and patterns that make them both important cornerstone books and fun reads. First, there's framing. All the Chronicles books have unique framing devices to set the tone and tell us something about the subject of the book. In the Andalite Chronicles, the dying Elfangor is delivering his story through something called a Hierarch Delist, a sci-fi tech version of a deathbed confessional. It starts the book off with a fatalistic tone and sets up the fact that Elfangor landed on this spot with a purpose, that this isn't some accidental crash landing. The Hork-Bajir Chronicles is a group of Hork-Bajirs delivering the story to Tobias through their oral traditions. It connects the Hork-Bajir to human cultures that practice oral traditions like Native Americans, and it showed the connection the Hork-Bajir had with Tobias, how they trusted him enough to fold him into their traditions. Visor, well, the framing device in Visor is kind of half the book. Actually, you can make a case that the flashbacks are the framing device of the court stuff. It's overly complicated, but that's fitting because Visor 1's history and motivations are overly complicated. Then we get to the Ellimist Chronicles. The framing device is the Ellimist tells one of the Animorphs' backstory. Okay, the Animorph in question is dying, and the Ellimist is telling this story out of a sense of obligation. The Animorph dying thing doesn't tell us anything about the story. It's a foreshadowing of an event at the end of the series, kept vague as to keep readers guessing as to which of the Animorphs this is, and the Ellimist telling his story out of a sense of obligation tells us that, the Ellimist pays his bills on time. It's the dullest and most unimaginative of all the framing devices, for the character capable of presenting his story in the wildest and most imaginative way possible. Imagine the Ellimist walking the dying Animorph through the story personally, switching between styles at a moment's notice. 1 minute, the Ellimist is leading his audience through a Disneyland Hall of Presidents style attraction, with events of his existence played out in animatronics. They go through a door, and now they're floating on an ocean of crystal, watching events play out in clouds and stars. We go through a stargate, and everything is reduced to equations. We pull back. The Ellimist is scribbling the equations on a blackboard. He points to a 7. "That's you," he says. And then he points to the symbol of universal quantification. And that was my wife. Kay Applegate could have done anything with this book. Anything! Instead, she opts to have the Ellimist verbally tell his story straight, the most boring way possible. The next thing that makes the Chronicles what they are is that there's always an element of surprise about them. When you finish those first 3 books, you're always left with an unexpected new dimension to the longer Animorphs narrative. You're always left with a wow moment. In the Andalite Chronicles, you expect to learn Elfangor's backstory. You are not expecting to learn that he's Tobias' father. Or, on a lesser, more personal level, that he was a deserter and his status as a war hero was a bunch of war propaganda. In the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, you expect to learn how the Hork-Bajir were conquered by the Yeerks. You are not expecting to learn that the Hork-Bajir are an artificial species whose gentleness is encoded into them. In Visor, you expect to learn about Visor 1 in the early days of the invasion of Earth. You are not expecting to learn that she fell in love as a human and had human children. Each of these reveals recontextualizes the entire series. The Ellimist Chronicles doesn't have that. Oh, I guess you could say that everything is a surprise because none of this was set up and can't be predicted. But the events here are so far removed from the main series that this book might as well be a new IP. Elements relevant to Animorphs don't show up until 3/4 of the way in. And when those elements do finally arrive, we don't really learn anything new about them. A twist worthy of a Chronicles book might be that the Ellimist protecting Earth was simply a holding pattern to keep the Krayok's eye off a more important battlefield, that the Ellimist sees Earth and the Animorphs as worthless pawns. Holy cow, imagine if at the end, when the dying Animorph asks if their life really mattered, the Ellimist looked them square in the eye and said, "No, you were pretty insignificant." It would be an ice-cold stab in the heart for both the Animorph and the reader. Of course, that's not the only twist the book could have done, but the fact that it doesn't have any, the fact that it doesn't recontextualize the rest of the series, would seem to put its status as a capital C Chronicles book in question. Finally, there's one more thing about Chronicles to discuss here, and that's subject matter. One of the reasons those first 3 books did such a great job at recontextualizing the rest of the series is because they chose cornerstone characters and concepts. If you took Elfangor out of Animorphs, it would be a completely different story. Same with the Hork-Bajir and Visor 1. They're all important elements introduced in the first batch of books, the very first cycle of 5 narrators. Sure, the Ellimist also showed up pretty early. The first hints of the cosmic plotline showed up in number 6, The Capture, and the Ellimist himself first appeared in the very next book, number 7, The Stranger. But is he nearly as vital to the series as Elfangor, the Hork-Bajir, or Visser 1? If you took him and his storyline out of the series, you'd be surprised how little would actually change. You'd lose a couple of good books, but the actual overarching story of the series would remain pretty much intact. The only vital contribution the Ellimist makes to the story of Animorphs is giving Tobias his morphing powers back. Without that, either Tobias would have remained powerless the entire series, which actually might have been pretty neat. It's not like he morphs all that much anyway. Looking at you, every single battle scene where Tobias rakes a Hork-Bajir in the eyes. Or you just restore his powers another way. It's not that hard. Hell, the Animorphs TV show came up with a different way to give Tobias his powers back, and that show actually had the Ellimist in it. Because this is what the Ellimist is. The Ellimist is a storytelling tool to take the Animorphs out of their own series and put them in another story. Anytime Kay Applegate, most likely the Michael Grant half of Kay Applegate, got an inkling for a story that involved alternate timelines or planets light years away from Earth or anything that really can't be done in the standard Animorph setting, they'd dust off the Ellimist. It's no different than if the Doctor occasionally popped up with his TARDIS, asked the Animorphs for help, and before you know it, the Animorphs are off fighting Daleks in a story completely removed from the Yeerk invasion plot. But Greg, if not the Ellimist, what other subject matter would have made for a good Chronicles book? Here's 5. 1. The Taxon Chronicles. Back in the day, this was the 4th Chronicles book everyone assumed we'd be getting. It'd probably be about Taxon culture and history in the same way the Hork-Bajir Chronicles was about Hork-Bajir culture and history, and it almost certainly would have brought back Arbon, the andalite stuck in Taxon form from the Andalite Chronicles. Those ideas do eventually make their way into the main series, but in a much more abbreviated form than some might have liked. There's more than a dozen fanfics with the title The Taxon Chronicles, so clearly this was an idea fans were interested in, and it would have given the Chronicles series a neat pattern. A book about a character, a book about a species, a book about a character, a book about a species, so on. 2. The Chi Chronicles. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? The Chi have been around for at least 4,000 years. You'd think they'd have some stories to tell. The idea lends itself to a short story collection, taking place in different periods, observational tales of these ancient alien robots trying to find a place for themselves in the turbulence of ever-changing human culture. One thing I've always wanted to know is how Chi deal with their own identity politics. How affected is your personal identity when you have to pretend to live this normal human life, then play act your own death, then come back pretending to be a completely different person? We could also get to see just how the Chi go about infiltrating and spying on the Yeerk invasion force. It'd be great. 3. The Chapman Chronicles. Ha ha, good joke, Greg. No. I'm dead serious. Chapman is one of the least important villains in the series. His relevance as a character ended with number 2, The Visitor, but he remained an eternal constant throughout the entire series. He keeps showing up. In essence, this would be a double bill with Visser. Where Visser was a story of the Yeerk leadership, the Chapman Chronicles would be the story of the Yeerk lackeys, the small-timers doing the grunt work without much of an idea of what's really going on. Basically the Animorphs version of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. 4. The Anati Chronicles. Now, this is different in that the Yeerk invasion of Anati is a very late addition to the series, first coming up in Visser. But the idea of a book on Anati has 2 things going for it. 1, it was a vital event that helped establish the final arc, so it would be a fitting tale for a Chronicles book published during the final arc. 2, it's mysterious. Nobody knows what happened on Anati. Anything could have happened on Anati. The Yeerks could have been attacked by sentient cheese. Who knows? Like the Taxon Chronicles idea, there's a decent amount of speculative fanfiction about Anati. And finally, 5. I was born in a log cabin in South New Jersey, the son of a bridge salesman and an airline stewardess. One Christmas, my pops gives me this toy truck. A few months later, I dropped it down the stairs. All the wheels broke off, so I stuck them back with band-aids and sold it to a neighbor kid for $0.25. It was then that I knew my destiny.